One just sort of logistical problem is last time we didn't really talk about the text because we just talked about general issues about dialectic and so on, which I personally found, really helpful, but we didn't talk about the actual passage that we read. So I'm not sure how to proceed. I mean, and frankly, there's a lot, as usual, there's a lot of this section I had trouble with, lots of paragraphs with question marks next to them, which is my symbol for I don't understand anything in this entire paragraph. But it seems, so I'm happy if we, if you guys want to go back to what we had to read last time. In this text, it seems like an obvious question, because I've heard this term fairly often, even in Hunter and others may have used it, as in the section for this week. I don't have a clear grasp of what he means by the beautiful soul, and why does he call it beautiful, given that he's kind of disapproving of it, but that, I mean, that's not a really broad question. It's a fairly, focused, detailed question. But anyway, that's one thing I would like to know is what is he, I mean, I think the first time I think I see it is on page top of 381 at the end of section 658. But anyway, I'm happy to talk about that or anything else in these two sections.
I just want to kind of just a few opening remarks. First off, Travis is on his way. He was going to be a little, also Eric, I think we talked about last time, I think Fridays are when he's doing his coaching thing now. And so until
I forgot about that.
Yeah, and when you said, I thought Eric would be, I was like, wait, yeah, why isn't Eric here? And then I had to kind of rack my brain, and I think I not know more Eric, but he's going to try to get through like the last half hour, and he's definitely going to be there for the literature seminars, and he's keeping up with the material. I mean, he sometimes messages me on Discord about the logic of science, which he's also working on by himself. He's trying to get through, or the science of logic. I mean, I always say that backwards. So it's whatever. The next thing that I wanted to say is, give me 2 seconds because I want to grab a blankie because I'm a little cold in my bedroom. Oh shit! I accidentally unplugged my headphones. That is fine. Okay. So also, the page numbers for this week, like for this section, it was 379 to 389, and the first place that we saw "Beautiful Soul" was like 381, right?
We were supposed to finish the section on spirit this time.
Yeah, spirit ends on 389 for me, at least for my edition.
You're talking about the section. You're actually literally talking about the page number.
Yeah. We can talk about the beautiful soul thing. I think that he really. Oh,
we don't have to. That was just.
Oh, it's at the very top. Okay.
Yeah. I thought. Well, I just want to say, I think the beautiful soul thing is actually a good idea because, yes, we didn't cover the nitty gritty of the last section of reading. We didn't, and tut, shame on us, whatever. But I have a few thoughts. First, I thought last meeting, I mean, I want to say that it went well, but if I do say that, I'm sure I'd be accused of saying that only because I talked so much. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, of course you'd think that. I'm sure you liked it. But I thought last meeting, I learned things. I was and I like kind of walking, even if it's just my conception of what's going on with these ideas. I always appreciate walking through the ideas and retreading ground and discussing them in person. I think the last meeting was very helpful as well. And also, Nevitt, you sent some messages on the Discord that I tried to kind of go through. And again, like I'm not a Hegel scholar. I'm not like, I don't have any authority on these things, but it's just these are what I believe to be going on. And I'm trying to but just establish and maintain a consistent or semi-consistent base of knowledge, or not knowledge, but of an understanding of what's going on. I'm trying to keep that going. And walking through these ideas like last meeting and or on messages on Discord, it helps that, and it opens me to critique and challenges of like even big obvious questions like, wait a minute, that's a paradox, right, that you just said, or so, whatever. And I have to actually think about that and then think, oh God, do I have something confused here? And I find that productive. My point is, I found last meeting productive, and I think that last meeting was sort of a diversion from the usual strategy of going like thing by thing, early to later in the reading. And I think that in the same way, doing this section this way, like just talking about the beautiful soul, I see as a similar sort of subversive approach, where it's like, rather than, okay, let's go to last week's text and then go item by item, what do we get, what do we not, then let's work our way slowly from, the hypocrisy of universality and blah, 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 to the hard-hearted whatever. And then we finally get to the beautiful soul or whatever. I don't think that that's completely necessary. I think that there is a side of me that thinks that literally every character on the page means something. You know what I mean? Like, there's a part of me that thinks that every bit of punctuation is in some way intentional. And I'm so like, but there's also that part of me that knows that, I suppose so, that is something of like, yeah, it's like a scholarly, or it's my delusional reverence for this dead German man, this like neurotic attachment, or at least that's what a psychoanalyst would say. But now I'm just gonna, now that I've just got those preliminary remarks out of the way, I think Travis also, I just heard him come in, so he's on his way to the seminar. I can just hear him through my headphones entering the door. But so I just want to make a comment on the beautiful soul thing and what I think about the beautiful soul, and just my reading of what it is and how it works, basically, without going on for too long, because I've already gone long enough with this preliminary thing. I think that the part where he starts really digging into the notion of the beautiful soul in a really direct way would probably be, let's see, yes, okay. Yeah, before page 383. Yeah, so probably 381, in fact. I'm going to go to the exact page and just find it. Yeah, so 381, at the top of 381, in section 658, 658, section 658, at the very bottom of 658, which is at the top of page 381, you have, I think, the first, maybe not the first, but the first mention of beautiful soul. And what you'll notice, Nevitt said, why does he call it a beautiful soul when he seems to be so critical of it? The very first mention of it is so-called beautiful soul. He's very like, and I think here's the whole point, I think, of what he's getting across there. In my view, what I interpret it as is that he gets through this discussion. It's in the beginning of this reading where he's talking about, okay, there's this vanishing of externality. Yes, I think he's referring to someone else's terminology. There are certain people who theorize the importance or the existence of the beautiful soul, which is basically what he kind of outlines it here as. Think of, the romantics who are like, truth is beauty, and I can shut my world of truth and sincerity and honesty and meaning and virtue or whatever, my inner world of beauty and clarity and meaning can be separated from the cold reality that I am stuck in. And so basically, proponents of the beautiful soul approach would say, just because I am put into cold and unforgiving circumstances does not in any way mean that I have to be cold and unforgiving myself. I can still have beauty and compassion and a sense of love and divinity and an attachment to meaning. I can still have these meaningful concepts within myself that orient my thinking and that ground my opinions. And I can still believe in something beautiful, something important to me, even though the world is not there with me, at least not yet, And here he's saying, and so let's see, to me, how that kind of slots in here, is that he's saying, okay, so this position that consciousness is in is such that all externality has vanished. There's no externality, the stuff external to it has no substance. It's all abstractions. that's why when we try to examine moments of consciousness, all we get are these weird extreme abstractions that we've been talking about for the entire length of this book. Every time we try to get to a moment of consciousness, all we can actually investigate are these weird, bizarre, extreme abstractions that tend to do this weird thing where they lose themselves and generate their opposite. Like even he is like, this is weird. Like this is a weird thing that it's doing, and it's constantly doing this as a part of this condition of consciousness that it's in, where all externality has vanished and has no substance for it, and its only possession is this active disappearing. It's not a thing that's disappearing, but it is a disappearing, this vanishing, this disappearing, this absolute difference or absolute untruth that collapses into itself. So consciousness, this consciousness that sees externality as being meaningless, substanceless shit, that consciousness cannot sustain existence by relinquishing itself. Meaning, a normal way to say that, I guess, like a sensible to me at least, would be it won't taint itself with action. It's not willing to sacrifice its ideals, sacrifice the beauty inside of itself. It's not willing to make a compromise. It's saying, like, I have a beautiful, pure, and untainted soul, and if I, let's say, try to rescue all of those like prisoners of war in this, camp or something, I will inadvertently in my action do something that's morally questionable. I'll shoot a guy, or I will step on a bug, or I will do something. My actions will have some ethical questionability, or some ethical openness that I can't handle. I am a pure consciousness. I'm not going to give up my purity just to go into the world and get my hands dirty. That's not worth it for me. I'm not going to taint my beautiful soul with action. So that's why he says, and at the end of 658, I think, he says, it is a yearning which only loses itself as it becomes an essenceless object. And as it goes beyond this loss and then falls back on itself, it only finds itself as lost in this transparent purity of its moments. In this transparent purity. That's what it's looking for, this transparent purity of its moments. It becomes this unhappy, so-called beautiful soul, and its burning embers gradually die out. And as they do, the beautiful soul vanishes like a shapeless vapor dissolving into thin air. So he's saying, like, this beautiful soul is represented in this sort of illustration of burning embers, this beautiful, bright, shining light, that's illuminating the world, using its pure light of universality and of judgment and of purity, pure knowing and divinity. This beautiful soul with its divine light, like the fire of Saint Elmo, it is really just burning embers. It's just these little embers that are going to gradually die out. And as they do, that beautiful soul is going to vanish too. And I think the reason that he says that is that the beautiful soul is in a tough position. It resigns itself to being totally opposed to actuality. It's like, I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to go do any ethical actions. I can't do that. I'm a beautiful soul. I'm too beautiful for that. I'm too pure for that. I don't want to get my hands dirty. And so it tries to act and speak universally with that other consciousness, and its engagement with the objectal mode of its knowing in acting and speaking universally, but it just ends up falling back into itself, constantly reverting back to this sort of singularity in its attempts at universality as a beautiful soul operating on the grounds of the universal principle. So it's like, it's basically facing the situation where it's like, oh God, I keep trying to do things. I know that I don't want to engage in actuality, right? So I need to do something universally. So every time I try to act and speak universally, the problem is all I do is I fall back into myself, and I lose. I just lose and I lose and I lose, and I'm wrong every time I try to act and speak in a non-actual universal way. And so what it finds is that its duty, its sense of duty, like Kant's notion of duty, that's just empty words. And conscience seeks to fill this empty duty with its own content. And its pure self, because it is a pure self, only has its individuality and its consciousness of the opposition as content to fill that empty duty with. And so all it has as a filling for these empty, meaningless, universal duties is itself and its own content. And that's why it constantly falls back into itself, because all it has is its pure self. It's just this pure contentless consciousness that is trying to do something universal. And every time it does that, the universality of it is the fact that it's so empty. And the fact that it's so empty means that it needs to be filled. And the only thing he's got as a pure, transparent, like glass consciousness with no substantial meat on its bones, all it has is itself and its knowing. And what that means is that every time it tries to fill a duty with content, all it gets is its individuality, its singularity, and its particularity, and consciousness of that opposition. So all it has is individuality and contradiction. So it's fucked out of the get-go. Sorry for my French, but it is.
So that's what this makes me, and from what you've said, this reminds me of what he says earlier. I can't remember if it was in this week's reading or last week's reading, where, and again, I'm never quite sure I'm understanding Hegel, so I may not have this right, but he seems to make this distinction between duty as a feature of consciousness or as a feature of will, and dutiful actions that actually happen. And Hegel seems to be arguing that talking about that real duty is duty that is active and does something in the world. But the problem is, and this maybe it sounds like I may be just rephrasing what you're saying, that when duty produces actions, it frequently also produces contradictions. Whereas when duty remains in consciousness as this pure universal duty, it's all self-consistent and rational. So for example, if, maybe he's directly talking to Kant, that's kind of that's at least the way I understood it. So if you look at Kant, he's got the categorical imperative, and the categorical imperative is real. I mean, as far as I can tell, it really is perfectly logically self-consistent. So as long as you keep it in your consciousness, it's perfectly logical. And then if you just think in terms of pure intentions that never make it into actual action, in other words, if you think about an act of will that never actually becomes physical action, that's still all, so I can be a dutiful, because he seems to be making this distinction between people who say duty is just making the right choice, which is really what Kant says. Kant says, what's important is that you make the right choice. What actually happens in the world doesn't matter because the consequences are irrelevant. What matters is that you choose correctly. And as long as you just think in terms of the a priori choice that I'm going to make, that everything looks nice and tidy and logical. But then when you actually act, then you sometimes get these contradictions. So for example, you have this perfect duty to preserve life, both your own and the lives of other people, because every rational being has ultimate infinite value. Well, what happens when you're in a situation, for example, where you have a choice of either preserving the life of another person at the cost of your own life, or preserving your own life at the cost of another's life, if that's the only choice? Well, there you have a conflict of perfect duties. Or like, Sartre's example of this in the Letter on Humanism is there's this young man that comes to him, and he specifically calls Kant out on this. And he says, Kant has no way to answer this. Sartre says there's this, apparently this was a real story. During World War II, this young man came to Kant and he said, I don't know what to do. My mother wants me to stay home with her. My brother died in the resistance. My father has forsaken the nation and the cause because he's become part of the Vichy German French government. And so I'm all my mother has left, and she wants me to stay home and take care of her and protect her. And yet at the same time, I feel this absolute obligation to fight the Nazis and to preserve my country and to help. Which one of these two should I do? And Kant's response is, pick one. Because they are both duties. He has a duty to his mother and he has a duty to his country, and they're both duties and they're both equally valuable, and there's no way to arbitrate them. And he says, he refers to Kant, he says Kant has no way to handle this kind of contradiction. And so I'm wondering if that's the kind of thing Hegel's referring to in thinking that, as long as you keep duty as a mental act, you don't have to face these contradictions. But when you throw it out into the world, you're always going to get, or not always, but frequently going to get these problems, and that Kant has no way of dealing with it. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to figure out, and the beautiful consciousness or beautiful mind, what you're describing, sounds like the person who's trying to do the first thing, trying to say it's all purely in the world of mental action, and I don't really have to worry about the consequences of what happens in the world. Unfortunately, I don't understand, if I'm right about that, I don't understand what Hegel's solution to this problem is. Now, Ed was going to say something.
Nevin, I wanted to respond to, would Kant be adverse to trying to deal with the moral puzzle that you relayed to us, because then that would get him into situational ethics, which is the very thing he's trying to not get into. You know what I'm trying? I mean, because that's why he's coming with the categorical imperative, right? So you don't get into, well, if A, then B, and all the getting into the density of it.
Yeah, I mean, for Kant, I mean, he divides duties into perfect and imperfect duties. Perfect duties are things that you should always do or never do, and mostly they're negative duties, like things you should never lie, never cheat, never steal, never kill. And then imperfect duties are things that involve happiness and stuff like that, and those you should do sometimes, but you have some flexibility. And the problem is that it seems to me, and apparently Sartre and some others agree, that there are going to be situations in life where you have contradictions of perfect duties. And I'm not familiar with the whole corpus of Kant, but at least in the groundwork for metaphysics of ethics, which is what I teach, he doesn't ever deal with that possibility. And I don't know that he does deal with it anywhere, because I'm not sure he can. And I read one paper, a contemporary paper, where someone said, well, what you have to do is you have to rank perfect duties. So for example, maybe you have to say the duty to the state is higher than the duty to the family, or vice versa. But if you start ranking perfect duties, you break perfect duties, because the whole thing about perfect duties is that they are unrankable. They are all of equal value. And as soon as you start ranking them, you're making everything an imperfect duty. And so at least it seems to me that Kant, on the face of it, has no way to resolve that. And to my knowledge, he either is unaware of it or he chooses to ignore it. It's like he thinks he lives in a perfect logical universe, or maybe he is the beautiful mind where he thinks, all you're responsible for is your choice, and consequences don't matter, which is pretty much what he says.
Well, from what you and Hunter said, I'm getting a sense that Kant really got under Hegel's skin. And I know that's not a philosophical way of saying it, but that he was very much bothered by the quote unquote solution, the Kantian solution to different problems. And that's why I'm thinking that if, as you said, how logical, rational Kant was, it seems to me that Hegel is going to have a messier solution that has to include emotion, right? It has to include those elements of human life that can't be summed up in rationality or logic.
Way early in the book, he says, self-consciousness is desire. And I'm still not exactly sure what to make of that, but I take him at face value. And so right there, because Kant says the ground of choice is pure rational will. And Kant wants to exclude from the moral world all emotion, feeling, all of that stuff. He wants ethics to be purely about, I mean, like I tell students, he basically reduces ethics to logic. You look for literally a logical contradiction in the will, and that's what makes an action a perfect action, perfect duty anyway. Not a perfect duty, is if you analyze it, you get this logical contradiction. But when Hegel, and again, I don't really know, but when Hegel says self-consciousness is desire, and then this dialectic is really messy. And so I think maybe you're right. Maybe, Hegel's general response to Plato and Kant and people who want all these nice, tidy solutions is that really what's going on is this dialectical shifting and changing, and it is messy. Sorry, reality's messy. So maybe when I say I wish I knew what Hegel's solution is to conflicts of perfect duties, maybe I'm asking Hegel to be not Hegel. I don't know.
I just or wait, Jackson, are you unmuted, or do you have, or no? Okay, sorry, whatever. I think that Hegel's solution to the problem of the beautiful soul, or whatever, or to the perfect duty thing, don't worry, Jackson, I wasn't trying to call you out. No, I think here's the way that I kind of interpreted this section, which, it's kind of like earlier with the faith versus the enlightenment thing. And I can actually kind of envision the movements or the positions that he's outlining within the theory. I can envision these positions as being ones that are taken up by actual persons, like proponents of the Enlightenment and proponents of faith, right? That are in this actual argument or whatever, In this, the approach that I felt like he went with is he starts this, I mean, we're starting from the middle of a section of reading, but as if it started here, if I can say he started somewhere, just for the sake of conversational clarity, I'll say that he starts from this position of like, there is this internal sense of divinity within a consciousness. And then he kind of works through that and then says, okay, this is kind of the mode of engaging that you would find in the speaking of the spirit of religious communities, for example. Religious communities, you might find this sort of spoken existence of spirit. And he makes some pretty crazy claims in this reading too. He says like language is the existence of spirit, and some like really cool stuff, really interesting stuff, which I agree. Some of it is kind of like, okay, sure. But he starts from this place about the speaking of the religious community about their spirit, where things are clear. There's this community of believers all in agreement on the level of the implicit, and that really makes me think of a collective of individuals, right? And then as the chapter goes along, he talks about, okay, well, they're taking up the position of something like a beautiful soul, and what is this beautiful soul, and how does it work, and what does it look like, right? I think
I'm not asking you to address the language thing right now.
No.
It's kind of putting a pin in that. So go ahead with what you were doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, by the way. Yeah, but that is interesting. I would like to talk about that too. It's weird, and I think we could talk about it. I think there's some stuff that we could get into. I think some stuff from earlier sections that would kind of illuminate that. But I think that the flow of the chapter is just like, he basically says, okay, so a beautiful soul is supposed to be this pure, innocent little sweetheart that is totally absolved from guilt and doing and action in the world, so that they don't taint their spirit, right? They're supposed to be just full of light and purity, such that they have no connection to actuality. And then Hegel basically says, okay, what if two of them got in a fight? What if these two of these sweet angels of people, what if they were like bitter enemies and hated and thought that the other one was evil? What if they thought that they were both evil and hypocritical and indignant and self-righteous and just the biggest freaking jerk you've ever met? And he goes through and it's just and it's not necessarily like a direct solution to these same problems that, like, he's not saying, okay, let's look at Kant. Kant had this problem. Here's the solution to that problem. But I think he's at least, or not at least, but he's pointing to like the implied argument to this model that is being offered by contemporary philosophy at his time, right? With the Romantics, with Kant, with pure duty, all this talk in the Western canon about duty and obligation and morals and figuring these things out. He's responding to that and saying, okay, let's just look at a model of what a lot of people are talking about and an approach that I'm seeing, be it with this guy or a little bit with this guy too, or whatever. And then he says, he proposes a potential problem with that model, you know, and says, well, this model is nice and it has a lot of truth to it. There's a lot of really valuable, interesting ideas that are being put forward by really brilliant people, you know, but that doesn't mean that I can't still offer this alternative line of thinking or look at or try to examine, like here in my text and my work, this problem, this contradiction, let's say, that I'm seeing. If we take the logic to its conclusion, if we say, okay, a beautiful soul is the goal, right? Well, let's imagine a couple beautiful souls. Okay, since they're pure selves that have no particular content because they're excluding of actuality, we can imagine two that are completely opposite approaches to their universality, right? Okay, what happens if they get in a fight? Like, he's like, okay, well, just trying to think, like, how could this model that everybody seems to be so kind of wrapped up in, how could it go terribly wrong? How could it just go terribly, terribly wrong and destroy the whole analogy? And so he says, okay, one of them would be this hard-hearted, judgmental guy, and the other one would be concerned with acting and actuality, and the judging one would say, no, duty for duty's sake is purely non-actual, you know. And at a certain point, he says, the only way that he's basically saying the only way that I can see out of this problem, this potential problem for this otherwise great idea that these other guys did, like Kant and so on, this otherwise fabulous idea, you know, this small problem of its like utter impossibility or the leading to like absolute opposition between individuals. Like, aside from that, great idea, but how can we potentially reconcile, you know, this contradiction or reverse the defeat that we've taken? We've taken a defeat here, you know. How can we reverse this? How is this okay? How does this actually, what's the silver lining to this cloud? You know, like Schopenhauer saying that life is a gray cloud. And I think Hegel is constantly trying to find the silver lining to that cloud, in a sense, in a very non-optimistic sense, but in a sense. And I think that his answer is out of the flow of this spiritless unity, right? This unrecognized judgment and unrecognized particular existence being forced to a breaking point. And this is all what, 380. I'll point to where this all starts. There's an important section where I think all this kind of starts kicking off, is on page 387 to the end. I think, yeah. So he talks about spiritless being, and from the spiritless being, these positions are forced to these breaking points, and then the power of spirit is this power over determinate concepts of particular actuality, you know, in the hands of the actualizing self, which determines and assigns the difference, by the way, which is where we were talking. Do you remember when I was like, I kept saying that same thing. The difference is always on one side. It's always it's in one person. It's one thing's fault that there's a difference. And this is saying that that's the actualizing self is the one who determines and assigns and experiences and totally from the bottom up is responsible for the difference itself, or is a technical, I think a technical way to say it would be contains that difference itself within itself. And with this recognition of this unity or power of spirit over determinate concepts in particular actuality, there is the forgiveness enters the frame, and that's on page 388 and 389. But forgiveness and kind of the reconciling yes, I suppose, are what I would say are Hegel's proposed approaches to the problem of the contradiction within the beautiful soul. Okay, I can, all right, sweet. I'll just, all right. I don't know. I stopped myself there, I guess, at a certain point, because I was like, I'd probably talk too much, but.
So let me ask you then.
Please.
So you've got the hard-hearted. So is the heart. So I'm always wondering where's the dialectical movement here. Maybe I don't know if that's the right way to think about this stuff, but I mean, is there some way to look to find the dialectical movement here in these different moments? You know, the hard-hearted soul and the beautiful soul, and I don't even remember what came before that. But is there some way to identify? And then you said the fault typically is on one side, which I think I kind of understand what you mean by that, because you know way back when in the spring you would say things like one side fails better, and I didn't have any clue what you meant then, but I think I'm getting a sense of that, and that one side sort of retains. I don't know how to put it, but so for example, and idealism sort of holds the ground for materialism or something, but it nevertheless bears the marks of having a conflict with materialism, and so it has to incorporate elements of that into itself. But I'm wondering, is there some way to identify the dialectical motion in this section?
Yeah, I really do think so. I guess I see the whole section, or the section that we read, as like this kind of back and forth. It's like a married couple or something bickering. It's like the whole thing is this from the point where he first brings in the notion of the beautiful soul back on 381, and he says it's pure self. It's trying to find content for an empty duty. It recognizes, okay, duties are empty words. They're just totally empty words. And consciousness is seeking to fill that empty duty with some sort of content. And that consciousness is a pure self. I'm already a pure self, and I'm totally pure, and I'm totally outside of actuality. Because externality has no substance for me anymore. I got to put something in this duty. Okay. And it does its own content. It has its own content, and its own content as a pure self is only able to be its individuality, just purely its individuality and its consciousness of opposition between singularity and universality. Those are the two things that it has to offer up as the essence of a duty, or of the content of a duty, I mean. And so you have universal consciousness and its individuality. And these are now the actors on the stage, which kind of operate in this dialectical back and forth, I suppose.
I'm sorry to interrupt again. So what do you mean by universal consciousness? Because there are these terms he uses like that. I'm still not sure what he means by that.
380. Well, I think that the the universal consciousness is the, like, imagine a consciousness, I guess. This, I think, would be like a, okay, yeah. I think it's in line with the question of like, what is a pure self, or what is a self divorced from actuality? I think that there's this position that consciousness finds itself in, and this is going back to the previous sections actually in the reading earlier. After this kind of influx of talk about language as the existence of spirit, as an assurance that consciousness has convictions about its duty, right? There's a section here that's kind of important, and it's on 378 actually, if you even want to turn back there. But I think it'll kind of get us where we need to go to what is a pure self and what is a consciousness of universality. So language as a, in fact, yeah, what page is it? 378. 378. So that would be section 654, I think, is really, yeah, 654, where he's really digging into this. And he says, okay, I just want to go through the argument in like a, whatever. He says language recognizes that there is a necessary universality of the self, right? I see that language is the existence of spirit. Language is the externalizing or the existing, because every time he says existence, he's being very specific about like presencing, ising, existing in the corporeal, tangible world of material reality. You know what I mean? Like existing within reality. And he says language is the existence of spirit. It's like the realized part, or the objectal. Okay, a very technical and weird way to say this would be the objectal correlate of spirit. The objectal correlate of spirit would be language in this argument here, right? So it's spirit made into an object. This position of being made into an object in this sense universalizes it. It is sent out into the world and made existent. And that quality of being existent, it can be true or false or stupid or smart or a waste of time or whatever, but it exists. And even the most radical of skeptic can point to it, maybe not saying that it, the most radical skeptic, skeptical of all universality, which I think can be, kind of weird, but like, no matter what I feel about a certain use of language, I can't even understand it. I can still argue that it exists. It's because language, at least under this conception from Hegel, is self-consciousness existing for others. And think about the way that language is formed, just in like making that sentence make sense. Self-consciousness existing for others. I cook up a thought in my self-consciousness. Well, first, I guess I operate through the lens of the understanding. And Joseph is making a very good point that I'm kind of working towards. This whole spiritual drama depends on the power of language. Like, that is pretty much the whole point. You know what I mean? But like, yeah, I operate with this power of understanding. I rip pieces apart from ideas. I contextualize, I stratify, I tabulate, and then I unify and I tear apart again, and I actualize, I reify, I negate, I do all these things, and then I utter it. But even before all of that utterance happens, I am operating within the bounds of a language. And this is what I was talking about as existing within a differential symbolic order, right? I exist as a symbolic creature in this differential symbolic order, and I operate based on language. And this is where Heidegger is coming from when he says like language is the house of being, and Zizek, where he says language is the torture house of being. It's this brutal intervention that it. In a way, one can say that, yes, language is, in fact, the limits to experience or whatever, right? Because a lot of people make that argument that, like, as we gain language, we gain experience in a sense, and language. That statement is true in the sense that language forms in a way the subjective horizon that our experiences take place within, and they all have to take place within that subjective horizon, which is a big part of being a subject, which is like a big part of the dialectical process. Is this experience of this subject, the science of the experience of consciousness and the phenomenology of a spirit. You know what I mean? So
here's one issue.
Yes.
I put this on in the follow-up comment on Discord. So if we say that we occupy this symbolic order, and that symbolic order is, I don't know what, constituted or mediated by language. I'm reminded of my, again, possibly erroneous understanding of Derrida, borrowing from Saussure, who says that, if I understand correctly, that language is nothing but a set of differences. In other words, it's a differential network where one symbol points to another symbol, points to another symbol, points to another symbol. And so all it is nothing but symbols pointing to symbols. And at least on my understanding of Derrida, his claim then is that there is no being there at all, I don't think. It's because when you have the symbols pointing to one another, they never point to anything. They never point to any reality. They never point to any existent being. It's just all symbols all the time. And so you end up with this, like Derrida says, this play of words that never really mean anything, because, if I say heart, then you look up the definition of heart and it's defined in a bunch of words. And then you look those definitions up and they're defined in a bunch of words, and and on and on and on. And it's just all words, all symbols, all differences pointing to other differences. And so I don't understand the sort of ontological dimension of language, either for Heidegger or for Hegel. But that, that's when you say stuff like that, like that's what pops into my mind. I just don't understand how language understood as a symbolic order. I mean, if it sounds like it's nothing but symbols, and symbols, at least the way I think about them, they're symbols. They don't, I mean, they purport to point at something, but if it's purely a differential order, then I don't see how you avoid Derrida's claim.
Well, there are two. That's actually a very good question, because I think it gets into kind of the meat of Hegel's big move past Kant, which is to take Kant's notion of ontological, his notion of epistemological limitation, our epistemological finitude and fallibility, which limits us to the phenomenal world and bars us from the noumenal world. Hegel wants to take us forward and say that how must the universe be structured for it to give rise to this set of circumstances where it is unknowable and where there is this sense of this epistemological limitation. And in what sense, therefore, is this epistemological limitation? It's kind of it's trying to operate within that. It's trying to face the problem of like the transcendental circle. I actually have some notes on the transcendental circle that I'm sure will help us. But my point is, he is saying, in what sense is the universe structured such that my supposed epistemological limitation exists? And in what sense is that epistemological limitation thus a part of an ontological impossibility of knowing? And thus this, and furthermore, actually, my existence and my being as a part of these things that I'm trying to relate to, that I'm calling actuality, makes me actual, and makes my abstractions actual, and makes my ideas actual, and makes so not only is the limited nature of my knowledge and the unknowability of things to him baked into the universe itself. It's this unknowable set of things, right? And this epistemological limitation then is no longer just an epistemological problem towards a perfect universe or a complete universe. It's literally like an ontological impossibility. It's this problem with the structure of things. But also, there's this aspect to which my abstractions and my words, my representations are, in fact, operating in the world and a part of actuality and a part of reality. You know what I mean? And there are two approaches to that we can take. And that's, I think, the notion of abstraction in Hegel and the notion of representation in Hegel, in the sense that I guess abstraction and representation to some people are synonyms. You know what I mean? But there, I know. To some people, I'm not being.
I'm gonna shut up there.
I'm not talking about anybody in particular.
Okay.
I'm not talking about anything specific. Not like Wittgenstein or anything. Listen, look, all I'm saying, he uses them as different operating terms, and when he says abstraction, I think, to me, and this is again part of this. This is part of a contemporary debate about Hegel. I'm not going to pull any cloak and dagger tricking you guys into agreeing with me, because this is what he's really saying. This is a part of the contemporary debate, but I think this is the case, and it's that Hegel makes an extended argument that subjectivity itself. This is the abstraction route. I think he's making a long form argument that subjectivity itself is the ultimate figure of abstraction, immanent to reality. I think he is saying, it seems to me like he is saying that abstraction itself is an immanent feature of reality itself, and the ultimate figure of that rule or principle is the existence of subjectivity, a standing, walking, talking, moving figure of the abstraction that is immanent to reality, as an engine of pure abstraction. You know what I mean? We're caught in pure, we're just this big abstracting thing. We're like the poster boy of abstraction, and we're immanent to reality. I'm immanent. You know, who's to say I'm not? You know what I mean? It's like, I'm as immanent as the next guy. So I'm as immanent as the noumena, I guess, right? I'm here, I'm participating. My abstractions and my existence as this pure example of abstraction kind of indicates to me that there's this abstraction going on in reality. If I'm real, and or if I exist and I abstract, if I exist and I am abstraction, then I think there's an existent immanent abstraction. And that's kind of the starting point of the line of thinking, right? Of transposing epistemological limitation for ontological impossibility. That's kind of one of the ways to approach it. The other way is through the notion of language as representation. And once again, representation, abstraction, these are just when he says these things, they mean these things to me sometimes, and even though they can be very close in their usage sometimes. But there's I guess a debate in materialism, right, between external production, like the cause of things, external forces of production, like is subjectivity a feature of being rather than something limited to particular conscious entities? Yeah, I think that subjectivity is a aspect of being, yes, but I don't think that implies a panpsychism. That's the thing. I don't think that implies a panpsychism of any kind or a pan-subjectivism or whatever, but I do think that that can still hold, it can still obtain that subjectivity would be a feature of being. Even though that feature of being must tarry with is singular individuality, or individual singularity, or whatever you want to call it, as a part of it. And when you're talking to singularly individual subjects, as we can call them, you can recognize aspects of their experience, and one of them being that of absolute otherness. We are alone in what some people, whom I have other thoughts on, would say is we're on like psychical islands. You know what I mean? We're on these individual epistemological islands. Or like, I think I remember a passage from Sartre saying that life is like a voyage on a ship, kind of into the dark, or like driving a car with a blindfold on. It's just this constant hurtling forward with only yourself and with no sense of what's going on. And those are the parts of Sartre that really drew me in. I really liked that stuff, but that is an aspect of subjective experience. Just for example, this absolute otherness and this total loneliness, these total separation from other conscious entities. I can never know what you think. You know what I mean? And so this is an element to subjectivity, but it can still, I think, obtain that it can be a feature of being. Anyway, I think that the materialist standpoint, which is still kind of here, and it still has points to make, right? This goes into the idea of representation rather than production. So the materialist stance, I think, would make a distinction between like external forces of production on one hand, like the Big Bang or quantum waves or whatever materialist productive force is making stuff happen. You know what I mean? Something, chaos, whatever you want to call it, atoms, the swerve. That's on one hand. The other hand is internal expression and representation. Those are two like things that stand opposed. External productive processes that generate us, right? That we're like caused by, in a way. In this lens, from this viewpoint, the cause is external production, and the effect is internal expression and representation. My world of expression is an effect of totally indifferent external productive material causes. My internal world of expression, right? So I think the stance that can be, or that stance of subject being its ultimate figure of abstraction would be that representation can't be reduced in a way to just an effect of production like the materialist stance would want to do, right? I think that one way to say it, I guess, would be that representation is, I'm trying to put this in terms of that egg metaphor, actually. A representation would be like the gap or the void that production seeks to fill in. Production being like the egg, the representation being like the internal of the egg, this internal representative place of expression and so on. That representation, this world of fantasy and symbols and representation, is like a gap or a void that production seeks to fill in a sense. And a good, I guess, an example of this would be like the difference between this theory. There's a theory in psychoanalysis, I guess. This is not, it's very brief and not very relevant. It's not like the whole point. There's just a term. I'm just borrowing a term. That language, as we use it, comes from like baby talk, baby babble. This, the noises that babies make, oohing and cooing, that in a certain frame, as an argument held up by certain psychoanalysts, is that is called la langue, which is this babbling and oohing and cooing and gurgling and burping that babies do, that serve as this sort of material basis, almost this first step of this bodily basis. In fact, I could say that this material or bodily basis from which language arises, right? But the position of Hegel, and actually Lacan as well, Lacan within the psychoanalytic community in regard to this psychoanalytic argument, right? He was kind of involved in this. He talked about this. He furthered the idea that language as this differential order holds priority and ontological primacy over whatever we want to call la lingua, or the bodily or material or productive, whatever. And the basic gist of that is that, like, all of these, and there's even, I read this paper by this South American philosopher who described this notion called hora, H-O-R-A, this natural bodily rhythm that is developed from walking and the beating of the heart and the respirating of the lungs, and the chewing, these bodily rhythmic phenomena, you know what I mean? Called hora. But within the frame that I'm describing, this Hegelian frame, even like that sort of thing can only come like after the, excuse me, I knocked my headphones off myself for a second, can only come after the abjection or the loss, the deprivation, the fall, the collapse that gives rise to the symbolic. And in a way, it's like it's a return. It's an attempt to return to pre-symbolic mimicry, in a way, within the symbolic. It's always going to be an attempt to return to some pre-symbolic mimicry within the symbolic, right? It's all happening within the symbolic. And I've got notes on language as the torture house of being. So we find ourselves as human beings caught in this differential symbolic order, where any attempt to return to the material or bodily basis for this differential symbolic order only give us more symbols. It's the transcendental problem, you know what I mean? When we try to find the transcendental in itself, all we get is the transcendentally constituted, the thing that is transcendentally constituted by the transcendental in itself, every time we try to find it. And that's sort of the same problem that we run into with the symbols, with our symbolic order, you know? We always just find more of these symbols, human beings caught in a differential symbolic order. And we, although we are caught in that symbolic order that is, you know, so definitive and so kind of nice, and even, I mean, it is an actively constantly growing algorithm, you know, playing itself out over time in a way. That's how some people argue that a language operates between persons. I don't know about that, but it's a visual metaphor at least. Caught within that, we still retain the character of absolute self-relating negativity as subjects, as spirits. That's Hegel's term. That's the psychoanalytic term for that is something like death drive. That's what Freud is talking about when he's like, but that's beside the point. Hegel says that there's this absolute negativity, which is this aspect that he keeps bringing up as this persistent character of consciousness, and this absolute negativity is caught in this symbolic order, and is thus kind of constantly trying to break the bounds and bend the rules and over-determine its contents and find a way out and return to naive immersion or something, or to create a new language like Esperanto or whatever. You know what I mean? It's always trying to do something new, or it's just plagued by the fact that when I say I love you, those words can never capture the beauty of my feelings for you, or the depth of the sincerity that I feel when I say I love you. There's this constant burning, at a certain point, I'm willing to say, a feeling that I have that is this inadequation, it makes me upset and frustrated, and I feel trapped, and I feel impotent when I try to use language to describe my feelings to people whom I care about and whom I trust and whom I want to be honest with. And I know that I just I don't even have the language to be honest. You know what I mean? at least not totally honest, I always feel like there's something left out. There's always something I'm hiding. There's always something that I'm not exactly pinning down perfectly with my words, and that I know that I'm leaving unsaid because I don't want to just belabor the point infinitely in this abyssal circle using this other person as like a emotional trash can. Instead, we're caught in language that operates like a torture house. We are caught in and tortured by language forever. You know what I mean? And that it points to this is not really a return to psychoanalysis, but it'll sound like it. It's the traumatic impact of speech itself, of language itself. I mean, it's the traumatic impact of language itself. Language doesn't just express our traumas or our problems. It induces it. Yeah, tortured by the inadequacy of language. We can imagine a world outside of language, but we can't imagine the cut that language makes into the real. We can totally imagine like some sort of pre-linguistic world or some world outside or beyond language constantly, but we can't imagine the schism or the problem that its existence poses for the notion of a consistent real, the problem that the existence of such language poses for any sort of stable reality. It is harder to imagine than just some objective world outside of language. And that, to some, points to the inaccessibility of the object that is the subject. You know what I mean? The subject, as it attempts to be understood as an object, is never able to be understood or conceptualized in this way. And so, to myself and to my idea of myself, okay, in Sartre, he splits this between my being in itself, which is like another term he uses is the pre-reflective cogito, my being in itself or my pre-reflective cogito, and my being for itself, my conception of myself, what I think other people see me as. Both of those are totally inaccessible to me. And also, all the stuff that Kant said was inaccessible to me is also still inaccessible to me. That doesn't go away. We don't get past that. But the very presence of that inaccessibility points to aspects of what's going on here, and points to this debate of production and representation, right? It points to the reasoning behind the idea that in this debate of production and representation, right? Production and representation, a true materialist stance, one could say, should assert the primacy of representation. Because, like, yes, production is from this objective standpoint, production is the ultimate cause of the scene of representation that we operate in. We operate within a scene of representation, and production is ultimately the cause of that. But production, as you can catch me doing with the air quotes, production in the human sense that we're only able to use it, the only way that we're able to talk about production, the limit of our expression of the term production, only emerges to fill in a gap in representation, in the things we don't understand, in the things that we don't have a formal capacity for. It's like where matter shows up. When we keep digging into the atom, we go from a molecule, and it's kind of like a pinball or whatever. And then we go from the molecule to the atoms, and then from the atoms down to the quarks. And then from quarks, we've got up quarks, down quarks, and that third thing. But I'm not a scientist. And then a little kid might say, well, what's smaller than that? And then all I would say is matter. It's just all matter all the way down. Don't worry. Just, I don't know, something material. That matter shows up to fill in the gaps in representation. Our notion of the term production or objective reality comes in to fill in the gaps in our representation, in our expression, in our language. Production fills in the gaps in language. Yes, in a way, la lingua, the baby babbling, is a material base for language in a way, but discussing it in this way covers up the gap opened by language. It's just a bandage. It's just this illusory thing. And so we have to own up to the gap. We have to take on the problem of pure abstraction and pure negativity, and face the gap in reality that is the subject, rather than trying to bandage over it, with notions of like Derrida, who might say that all we have is the reflexivity of our ideas, right? And so we can never know anything about reality as it stands, that reality out there as it stands, him uttering the idea that there is a reality out there that we understand, or that we don't understand, or that we can't talk about because all we're doing is pointing between symbols or whatever. That is closing the book, ending the discussion, period, full stop, end of debate as to what to do with our words and how to understand or interpret our position or the nature of our reality. End of discussion, right? That is, in a way, I guess, I'm willing to call that a bandage, a thing that covers up the gap opened by language, and analysis of this gap is kind of weird, and really thorough analysis of how it works is taken up by people like Lacan, but like an object A and stuff like that, but that's whatever. Hegel, is more so just kind of on this ground of the subject as abstraction. Now I've talked for way too long, and I also have to pee, so somebody else take charge.
How can one take charge after Hunter? That's the question right there.
There was so much there, I guess I still don't, I think I think I understand what the critique of Derrida, and that in a sense is just giving up. And I think that's kind of true. It seems like there's a sort of deep skepticism there with Derrida that says, well, all we've got are symbols, and so let's stop pretending like we have anything else. It's kind of almost like a radicalization of Kant, who says we can't know the noumena, and Derrida said can't know anything. But I still don't get, and I'm sure I dismissed it in what Hunter was saying, I still don't get how Hegel's conception of language as a differential symbolic order, I'm guessing, Hunter, you addressed this, but I just missed it. I don't understand how Hegel's conception of language as a symbolic order touches anything. Unless it's just, you're saying it's sort of and so by transcendental argument, like the basic idea of a transcendental argument that I understand is you ask, what are the conditions for the possibility of? That's the basic of a transcendental argument. So, Kant says, what are the conditions for the possibility of having this kind of experience? And from that, he deduces transcendental ego, and so on. And it sounds like you're saying Hegel's doing the same sort of project, except that he's trying to avoid, he's trying, rather than saying there is an aspect, I can't even say reality because the noumena isn't reality, but that there's something out there, something beyond experience. He's trying to just incorporate that noumenal unknown into reality itself, and just saying reality in itself is already unknowable in this essential way, rather than trying to eject the unknowable into a whole nother, some other realm. He's trying to sort of incorporate it into this world and in our experience. But I kind of, if that's right, I get that, but I still don't get how language as a symbolic, and again, I'm sure you explained this, but I just missed it. How does language as a differential symbolic order get at or interact or do something with being, rather than just being a bunch of symbols pointing at each other?
Yeah, no, and I get that. I think I mean my first thought is just it's not. Yes, I think that a good way to approach this, I think, would be to say that, like, subject is, in a way, I think, I'm going to keep saying stuff like this, it's like an ontological crisis or catastrophe. Subject is like a crisis, and it as this crisis, this constant deviation or disturbance or swerve or whatever away from stability or over determination of particular determinations. There are a couple things that are aspect or characters of its movement that we can point to involving language. And one of those, I think, this is something that I used to think about a lot with when I was really into politics. I was really into politics, and I guess I still am, I suppose. I don't, but I had a much different idea of politics at the time. I had a much different conception of what political action and politics in general were. And I thought a lot about the term praxis. Praxis, everybody's favorite. It's, collective activity in a life world, right? That would be praxis, collective activity in a life world. But what that means is that language, even if it's just a symbolic order pointing to signs and symbols, even if that's the case, it is a form of praxis. And language, as this collective activity in a life world, has this effect that I think Hegel's very accepting of and open to, and it creates distance, right? I guess my question is, how does language arise in reality? How does the gap that separates words from things arise? There's a gap that separates words from things. Well, how does that gap arise? Language, in it, like I was saying, language creates distance. Language gains distance from reality, we can say, whatever that reality we want to pin that on to be. Language is, and that's like also in line with what Derrida is saying. Still, it is always gaining distance from reality. This is the old psychoanalytic notion, symbolic castration, the total inadequacy of language. And Hegel would talk about this in the section on the understanding. He talked about this in the section on the understanding, the power to separate what belongs together in real life. The understanding is the power to separate what belongs together, or to separate organic unities. And language is always doing this. Language never really fits reality. You know what I mean? Subject, thus, or as a part of that, can never locate itself in reality. Subject can never, ever hope to locate itself within this objective order, and I don't have a universally valid objective sense of what's going on, but I have an objective sense of what's going on in the sense of them being objects. There is an objective order, and I cannot, and within that objective order, though, language operates with this sort of praxis, this collective action in a life world, which is where Hegel was coming from earlier when he said that language was self-consciousness existing for others. Way back back to the actual reading that we did this week, the language as the being of self-consciousness for others. It is this thing that never fits reality. This subject can never locate itself in reality, you know, even if it is in a way the language that it is speaking or saying or whatever. And so you have this, I guess, not only do you have the notion of language as praxis kind of underlying the, like, how does it point to something other than language? But even then, you know, I guess they can only point to language. But at the same time, we don't want to say that language fits reality. Language never fits reality. It's in line with what Derrida is saying, that language doesn't ever totally kind of lock into to what's going on. It can never really totally apprehend what's going on. But excuse me, my very experience of this structure of possibilities within, I mean, that's like almost, I think Deleuze might say that, this structure of lines of flight within whatever particular, and then back to Hegel, singular individuality that I may be experiencing and or expressing, within that, my language itself is in actuality. Most definitely, you know, most definitely it's at least in actuality. You got to give it that much, you know, that much credit. But does it directly refer to the world? That's a question of the points of reference. And I think Derrida would say that no, they just refer to other symbols, you know, and I find that to be believable. I find that to be reasonable. But still, I think that they work in this way that's useful, and that
So here I have
yeah.
This is a question that's related to things we said on Discord. And again, I'm not sure I understand what you mean, but would Hegel say that, you know, I think you said something about subjectivity being difference. You know, would you say that Hegel believes that, you know, subjectivity in some way that I don't understand, since it's not, I mean, since it's not panpsychist, I don't really understand how this is true, but the subjectivity is somehow constitutive of reality or actuality. I mean, all these words mean something for Hegel that I don't understand, but that the subjectivity is constitutive of the real, and that subjectivity is difference. And so therefore, subjectivity produces these oppositions. For example, the opposition between the thing and the symbol of the thing, or something like that. So that in a sense then, is language in the symbolic order a manifestation of subjectivity's differencing of reality. In other words, you have subjectivity that is actually fracturing reality and breaking it into subject and object and other kinds of oppositions. And then the symbolic order is I don't know what, again, a manifestation of that differencing power that subjectivity brings to actuality. Does that sound at all right?
Yes. I mean, yeah, I think, yeah, I there's this, yeah, spirit as, or I guess subjectivity, you know, just to be more whatever. Subjectivity, at least in the Hegelian frame, yes, has this power of, or this aspect to it of absolute negativity. And in its operating as understanding or whatever, the human as the night of the world, right? A horrific entity of understanding, appears in a way as the disintegration of all possible orders or whatever, this disintegrating, this dissolving into these weird, like, oh, there was this unity, there was this simple fine unity that we could propose of a normal universe, and then these freaks, us, came on the scene, started ripping everything to shreds, and were these horrible entities of understanding, and in our machination of understanding, there is an aspect to it that is abstraction. Abstraction, I mean, that's what it is doing. It's abstracting aspects. It's abstracting things. It's abstracting reality. It's abstracting actuality. And so this, if subjectivity is a part of the actuality we're talking about, then abstraction is always already embedded in any concrete whole, any concrete totality or concrete thing, concrete unity, concrete this, whatever. Abstraction is always already embedded. And this, one way that I know some people to illustrate this is kind of weird, but through the notion that crime presupposes a law that it breaks, but it must be grasped as an abstractly characterized act which law sublates into formally being a crime. I know that that's weird, but it's in trying to understand a concrete whole, moving from the abstract to the concrete, my point is, this abstraction can be seen as an immanent aspect to the concrete, especially just as far as subjective experience is concerned. But for its subject to experience, I think, and to be certain of itself in any sense, which I don't even know if it necessarily is, actually. I know it sounds, I know Hegel says that phrase a lot, but I don't know. I really don't know. I think the answer is no. I think he thinks that subject isn't even really certain of itself. I think it can't be, really. I think that, I don't know if that's a spoiler. I think that might be what absolute knowing is. Maybe not. I don't know. We're going to have to see. But that's my current prediction for the story up to that point. I think it's going to be that it can't, because it keeps trying. But I think the thing is that it's going to be that no, it can't be. But yes, this abstraction is inherent to reality itself. Life is not rich while abstractions are gray, but life without abstraction is what's gray, and analysis or abstraction is what, for Hegel, makes it rich. His notion of concrete universality attempts to include abstraction within concrete reality itself as its immanent constituents, and enriches it. But yeah, reason being like the seeing of the immanent negativity in the thing itself. I think reason is kind of like the understanding is tearing something apart. Its problem is that it just doesn't go far enough. It sees itself as external to the object. It's like Derrida. Derrida tears the thing apart, but sees its tearing apart as totally outside of the object. It's like Derrida is giving the object a Reiki massage or whatever, whereas he floats his fingers just barely above the surface of it and is like, I'm tearing you apart right now, and never touching it. But for Hegel, I think his problem is that it just doesn't go far enough. And reason is seeing the immanent negativity and tearing apart and shattering and breaking in the in the things themselves, the abstraction as being in the things themselves. And an example of his persistence of abstraction, or of his notion that abstraction is an immanent character of reality, is the persistence of abstraction. That's what I meant to say. He has I think, he has a sense of a persistent aspect of abstraction within the things he theorizes. Because I mean, like if we look at his notion of society, like in the ethical life, when he talked about living the ethical life, back when he was all about Antigone, back when he was talking about that stuff, he talks about this barbarism at the core of society. Ethical life of a society is founded on barbarism. And so because the highest ethical act is sacrificing oneself for that society against a different ethical edifice. So we can't achieve the expansion of peace that we want by law, because there's this necessary barbarian core in the heart of civilization sustaining its ethical edifice. There's this abstraction from the civilization itself sustaining its ethical edifice. Support for the ethical edifice, therefore, is a support for barbarism. This abstract extreme opposite. What the, it's like, whoa, like where is this going? Where's this coming from? Oh my God, what's passing by me? Where's this? Where'd this deadlock come from? From this simple assertion of civilization, right? How do we resolve it? And I think he critiques an idea. I think he said something like most try to fight this, or most try to overcome this deadlock of like the barbarism at the core of society. This is kind of an offshoot a little bit, but he says most try to overcome it by fighting something else, like as a universal, like class struggle or ecology, or perhaps like what Travis was talking about the other day with the climate change thing. This guy who was so obsessed with climate change. There's this problem that this guy faces, which is that in order for him to act ethically, he wants to act ethically. And in order for this dad who abused his kids for the sake of climate change, I'm just going to say that about him. I hope that's not derogatory or offensive to him or anybody else, but I think that is the case. I think this person was being emotionally abusive to children for the sake of a climate change activism. And I think this state that he's in, this desire for ethical life, to be an ethical person, to say to himself that he's a good person, I think that that's tricky. I think that if you're committed to doing that, people don't do that because they try and then they give up and they say that the world is unfair or something, or they make a compromise, or they become jaded, or they refuse the contradiction of supporting an ethical edifice coming with unfortunate sacrifices, with one being not the lives and well-beings of your children as the first one necessarily, but of your ability to call yourself a good person. We can talk about that one first. You might have to give up the right to say that you're a good person in order to do the right thing. You know what I mean? Because you're in a way supporting something like a barbarism. So you can't just say that your hands are clean. But if you try to clean your hands of this problem, you try to fight something universal, you try to reorient yourself and fight something universally, just be barbaric against something enigmatic like ecology or climate change. It doesn't lead anywhere. It only universalizes the sacrifice. And it makes it so that nothing means anything, and your fight is for nobody, except maybe yourself. But at this point, are you even happy? Is this what you wanted? It doesn't seem like it. You know what I mean?
Well, what if you? Yeah, but isn't that the huge problem? What if using all the information you had and all the studying a person has done have said, yeah, we've already hit the iceberg. If we're going to use the analogy, the issue of climate change, and you're like, yeah, we've hit the iceberg, but we have a slim chance of not having the entire planet go into the shitter. How can you be moderate about that? I mean, the very nature. I mean, you are very concerned about Nazi Germany. You think he's the leader of it is a homicidal maniac. Why aren't the Western countries doing more? And people think you're a fanatic and you're Johnny One Note, and boy, are you a drag at parties. And why don't you just shut up? But I'm sorry, over 6 million people died. And so, you know, wasn't the person who was very concerned about Nazi Germany and Hitler on point? Shouldn't he or she have been listened to more?
Wasn't that the point of what Hegel was making though?
But I mean, I think that you can't know like whether or not you're right until it's kind of already passed and already happened. Like, and that's the problem. That was what I was kind of talking about, was that it's like the difference between a climate change activist kind of being crazy and doing this, and like a QAnon conspiracy theorist, you know, that like we can accept the climate change, but we can't accept the QAnon. But if all the QAnon stuff ended up being real, then we'd be like, oh, well, they were right. You know, like they were the ones that, you know, they were fighting for it, and we thought it was crazy, but they were really on point, you know? And so it's like this weird thing where like, I think we tend to apply sort of virtues to certain things when in reality it's like we are willing to accept a lot more for something that we think is more important, and this more important is very unclear until kind of, I think, after the case in which it's happened, you know, and until we have kind of distance from it, you know. And so like obviously we can sort of use facts and say, oh, well, climate change is based on facts and QAnon isn't, and it's that simple. But you know, at the same time, it's like the facts themselves, by being a part of language and a part of reality, are again something that we can only sort of confirm after it's happened, you know. And so someone who is abusing their kids for climate change, it's like, you know, we are inclined to respect that more than we are inclined to respect someone pushing away their family for QAnon, or hurting their family for that. You know, I'm not saying that isn't right, I guess, in some sense, but like it's just that I think points to this sort of fundamental problem that I think Hegel is trying to talk about. And you know, and again, it's not like trying to say that, oh, we shouldn't fight climate change or you know, anything like that. I mean, I just think that it will remain complicated no matter what, you know, and we cannot sort of simplify it, and we can't say that this person, because they're radically doing it, that's an important thing. You know, the radicality, or how radical it is not, it doesn't make it any less sort of complicated, I guess, you know, on either
What
side.
do you when you use the term radical? I didn't know to what you were assigning the term radical to.
Well, you were talking about how, you know, the only way that we can sort of do anything about climate change, for example, is acting radically. You know, that people are going to like kind of be looked at as like a weirdo for wanting to actually not moderately change their lives. You know, that sort of radical.
Well, I was positing it. You know, what if? You know, if what people are saying, some people are saying about climate change are correct, then is the person who is saying we need to make radical changes a radical? If we've already hit the iceberg, then it seems a person who says we need to make radical change, ironically enough, isn't radical. It's
Yes.
a person who is trying to say, hey, this is the reality.
Yes, and the thing is, I think that one can be totally enthusiastic about a struggle for their survival or for the well-being of people or for the health of children or whatever, some cause. You can struggle for your cause, right? But that struggle for that cause will not at all transcend the deadlock of support for ethical edifices being equivalent to a support for barbarism. And the attempt to resolve it of fighting something universally, everybody banding together and fighting the good fight against this really evil thing, the actual evil, rather than just these petty squabbles between cultures and religions and what, or maybe not even that. You don't even have to say that or be that dismissive of those problems. You can just say that, like, we have lines that divide us, but we have one singular enemy, and that singular enemy does not necessitate a support for barbarism, but as evinced by this guy not having to, but feeling as though he has to do and say these very questionable things to these very young children. I think that would be an example of the barbarism that he supports in support of his ethical edifice. And what I'm saying is that support for this ultimate universal enemy would indicate a support for an ultimate universal barbarism, which at this extreme is not even barbarism against somebody else anymore. I can't be barbaric against plastic waste. My barbarism gets reflected back into me or my people, and so I'm yelling at my kids, and I'm guilt tripping my friends, and I'm shutting down public services and luxuries, and I'm dismantling corporate entities and chains of production and whatever, you know what I mean?
But what about the barbarism of everyday life that is going on for people, millions of which are leading lives of practical slavery, making bricks in Pakistan where they're held at gunpoint, making pennies a day because they sign contracts that they're illiterate and they don't know. And when they try to escape, people in cars with guns forcibly take them back. This isn't a hypothetical. The way things are now, right? So we don't even have to talk about the future. But there is so much barbarism in the world today, to borrow your term, about the way things are going on every single day.
We're acknowledging as a community that that is bad, and I think that's what Hegel was trying to say. Like we are establishing through the language of what barbarism is as a community, because he says this in 662, I think, or 663, where the evil is in the sense, or what he uses the term evil is when we recognize as a community that the for itself is present through the process of language, where it's not honoring the other, it's just a for itself act that isn't honoring the self-consciousness of the other beings having a being for themselves and for others. So this whole concept of thought and action through a community of consciousness is what he's saying is important to have as a language that kind of posit each other, so that we can recognize that this act of what you're saying is a descriptive is not the way it ought to be, to kind of differentiate between prescriptive and descriptive thinking.
And has he reached the point of saying, okay, after there's this community of acknowledgement, then what must what we do? What must we do?
Stay tuned next week. Who knows? Religion? I don't know.
Yeah,
same bat channel, same bat time.
Yes, it could. Yeah, it could be. Could have something to do with religion.
No, but the reason why I'm bringing it up, because what you're saying is very, very important. But if someone says, well, but that's okay, so you have this community of belief, and you all agree with each other, and like, so what? I'm not part of that community. I think you're all full of crap.
Yes, but this is the thing. It's the point is not to assert or promote a new uniting universal order, a new uniting universal principle or something, but to argue that we cannot achieve the universalization of peace through anything like law, because there is a necessary barbarian core in the heart of civilization, sustaining the ethical edifice as it is. The problem is not necessarily that Hegel has it, he's figured it out, and he knows what'll throw us into the new era of peace and civility and friendship or whatever, but that our current structure, even at its most intense hyperbolic example of potentiality for peace, like the legal enforcement of peace in the globe or whatever, or a universal enemy that we can all band together and fight, even in those insane hypothetical situations, which do happen, the problem does not go away. The system that we're caught in is one of contradiction and collapse, and it's a powder keg and it's ready to blow. And every single time that we keep trying this same shit over and over, we're gonna get people killed, and we're gonna get into a situation where I support an ethical edifice like capitalism, right? I don't know, I don't, but let's say that I do, because I want to support something. I love my country, or I love my money or something, or my lifestyle. I don't know, there's something about my life that I like and that I want to fight for. And in order to do that, I have to accept as a necessary aspect of my luxurious lifestyle that there are going to be things like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and there are going to be phenomena like child labor, and like cheap exploited labor, or slavery, or struggle minerals being mined out of the earth for my convenience and literally for my amusement. I have to accept that, at least that's what Hegel is saying, that if you're going to support this edifice, you have to recognize that you're a barbarian.
That sounds like a formula for despair, absolute despair, because if this is always going to be a feature of every possible system, then there's going to be some people, like maybe myself, who are like, well, then fuck it. I mean, it's, whatever comes after capitalism is going to be just have its own messed up, its own problems. And then if something comes after that, it's going to be the same. And every system is going to be grounded in barbarism. And so
yeah, and I think that, I mean, at least the appealing aspect of despair for me is the sort of constant struggle to actually accomplish something. And I think that that's kind of what, to me, this argument is that as soon as you think that you're not struggling anymore, that you're on the side of the good, that you're succeeding, is at the very moment in which you will fail, in which you will no longer sort of see the horrible things that you're doing. The problem is not that this guy is trying to like help climate change or whatever. The problem is that he's equating climate change with love for his children, to the point to where he ignores the horrible things he's doing to his children because he literally sees himself as saving their lives. And so it's just, it to me, it is just this point of, yes, of course there is still value in doing things, but we have to constantly be careful about what we're equating. And
see why there's value in doing things. I mean, if everything I do is necessarily, if Hegel's saying everything I do is necessarily going to be accompanied by, these severe negative downsides, then everything I do is gonna have terrible consequences. So whatever good I mean, that's what he's saying. If whatever good I do is necessarily going to generate terrible shit, well, then why not just live with the shit we got now? Why generate new shit?
Because we have the chance to learn something, because that new shit tells us something. It's like Hunter was talking about. It's like, because we leave that horrible shit with scars that stay with us. that change our eventual actions, that allow us to get closer to something. It's not success necessarily, but it's something, you know, and
Yeah,
that's
but that something's just going to be accompanied by another giant pile of shit, just as stinky as the last one. So,
but it's a different smell.
Yeah, but it's still shit. So
Yeah,
who the hell cares?
Yeah, at what cost are we learning things?
I care.
I care too.
Einstein understood the universe better, and he gave us the basis for the atomic bomb. Oh, goody. I'm
Yes.
glad he scratched that itch.
And
He pushed the knowledge of physics further, and now we've got the nuclear arms race.
it's not necessarily that it's just the unmitigated pursuit of pure knowledge for its own sake in my individuality. That is not the point, I think, nor is it the omega point of the realization of an absolute victory over moral conundrums. I don't think that either of those are reasonable, realistic, or admirable goals for a person to consider. I think that that is idealism of the worst kind. And I think that Hegel's absolute idealism seems to be a bit more grounded than even that. And what I mean by that is that, yes, I suppose you could say that I'm in a state of despair, and that sucks. But I think that Hegel is in a sense advising to move from skeptical doubt about whether these things are important to absolute despair. Despair being doubt to the second power. Doubt remains certain of some choice being present between two things. Despair transforms the idea of two-ness and twists the space itself, putting doubt itself into doubt. So who cares if you doubt? Who gives a fuck? You know, like, so what, you don't feel good today, or you think you're tired of the shit, you want a different, you don't want so much shit in your life. That sucks. That really sucks. I'm sorry that your doubt is so powerful of a thing, so important of a thing to you, that it would totally negate any sort of sense of intervention into actuality, or, to get to the point in a sense, to exercise the purpose of your freedom in any sort of manifestation, and not to interpret the world like Marx seems to accuse him of doing, but to lose the world, to lose it, to refuse it, and to create a new one. And I'll tell you who cares. In fact, you could go right now to pretty much anybody who makes $7.25 an hour and tell them that you are of the mind that any sort of action for change will produce the same level of shittiness, and therefore there should be no struggle. There should be no further struggle. We've actually found it, we figured it out. We're on the right side now. We're actually on the side of righteousness because we're not even engaging in the tainted activity of actuality. I'm actually a beautiful soul, you see. I'm pure enough that I can recognize that any intervention into actuality is just going to get my fingers dirty. And instead of doing that, I don't want just shit. I want purity. I want goodness. I want beauty, like my beautiful soul. And I'm going to go to the guy, like the guy making $7.25 an hour, and tell him I would, or, you know, the young firecracker factory worker that's like 8 years old and got her fingers blown off or whatever. Tell her, I know you're struggling. I know it sucks, but any attempt at changing your circumstances, it's just going to be fucked up again. You understand, right? You know what I mean? Like,
that's what I'm saying is I'm not saying that's what I don't understand where you're going now, because it sounded to me when I was asking you questions, it seemed like you were saying that unsarcastically. And now the way you're saying about the 725 person and someone coming up to him saying, well, anything that I could do to help you would just cause you to be a greater consumer, and maybe you'd buy a car and you'd put, you know, these gases into the atmosphere and you'd be helping, you know, destroy the ozone. So maybe it's better that we have all these poor people because they're actually will be consuming less and destroying the planet less. That I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I'm not saying that that's the way I want to function, to be in the world, but that was the implication of what I thought your interpretation of Hegel was.
Well, the only way that I think this can make sense is if we say, like Nevitt is doing, it's ethical to save myself from suffering at the cost of subjecting others to equal or worse suffering. This gets into the economizing and the tabulating of the notion of suffering and happiness, and the seeking of meaning or of value being equated to something like suffering or to saving myself from suffering. But the reason that I said, what if we tell these people, right, that we're just not going to do anything or whatever, and why I think it's different, right? That's not like what I'm saying is that, like I said, the point is to examine the world and to refuse the world and create a new one. I think that in confronting the problems of my world, just because my intervention into the world, just because I engage in the world, and when I engage in the world, there is some potential downside, or in fact, you know what, let's say this, because my actions do not produce pure, or in fact, absolute moral purity, because I cannot act in pure moral, absolute, fulfillment, right? Because I can't do that, does that mean that present victims of circumstances that are oppressive should be executed or banished to a life of their present circumstances? I say no. And what
does Hegel say? I mean, I thought you were interpreting Hegel a certain way that was leading to certain conclusions that's why I brought the things up I did.
Well, yes, and I'm with you that, like, I think, okay, we can. How do we reapproach this? Okay,
I'm not saying that everybody should accept the status quo, whatever that is. I'm not saying that at all. Speaking personally, but I was trying to get a handle on what Hegel was reaching for.
I think I've got it. and here's the answer. Okay. And I swear to God, I really do think I've got this. And Travis, you might like this. I think that the reason that it makes sense to me, the reason that everything that I said, I still stand by, is that from this position of this like unconquerable deadlock of barbarism and of this shit in every direction, like, and you guys are not wrong. Like, that's a big fucking problem. If every possible solution just creates like equivalent shit, and it would just be us working in a circle. I totally agree. I'm not fucking around or trying to be sarcastic. But I think that the reason that Hegel, at least in some sense, offers I don't want to say solution, but I guess I'm just going to say that, a solution to this deadlock, or a silver lining to this cloud, is that from our position, looking at the deadlock, it seems like there is nothing that we can do. It legitimately seems like there is nothing at all that can be done. But within the frame of Hegel's dialectic, nothing can become something. Nothing is a positive thing. Nothing means something. Impossibility is not a barrier, it's its own solution. The impossible world that we seek, some sort of utopia or some sort of reconciliation with contradiction, some sort of development, this impossible development in a space of unorientable dialectics, with these Mobius strips and these unorientable shapes and these lines of reasoning that say that we just move suffering around from one place to the next and put us in a place where nothing that can possibly be thought could solve the solution, right? We enter into I think, to me, something that is illustrated by writers like Samuel Beckett, talking about the end, where we've run out of options and we've run out of time, and we can't see any way out. And in that position, the game is over. We lose. But the worst part, this is why it's not necessarily optimistic. The worst part is that time keeps going and you have to keep playing. And you don't get to stop just because you lost. And the only thing that you can do is constantly try to reverse the defeat. And that is what you do to get out of bed or to wake up or whatever. And then there's the question, okay, well, what if I don't even, yeah, what's the point or what's the motivation in playing, you know? And that's the thing. It seems like there is nothing. There is nothing as the point of playing. We're in a position where there is no point in playing. Nothing is the point of playing. There's no point in helping anybody or doing anything or solving any problems or making any action in the world, right? And that nothing, that lack of a point, that lack of a purpose, this emptiness that you're experiencing, this abyssal character that puts you into these places of depravity where you'd say that there's no point in engaging in the world, right? Let me break this down in a weird way. Let's talk about the idea of all and nothing. The notion of saying all and nothing, when I say that there's no point, when there's nothing, all and nothing, it's all or nothing for you guys, right? There's either a point or there's no point at all. And right now there's no point at all. It's all or nothing. And right now we're at nothing. The notion of saying all or nothing, it necessitates a second all, A2, that seems to realize the conceptual claim of all, the original all. Because all has to include the nothing, right? Because nothing is something, so all has to have an all too, which contains all one and nothing one, which means there has to be a nothing two, which causes an infinite regress, A1, A2, A3, A4, N1, N2, N3, A4, or whatever, you know, N4, N5, whatever. N causes the reduplication of A. This is just a logic thing, okay? Nothing will cause the reduplication of all. All will always redouble itself in order to include the nothing. A2, N2, A3, N3, A4, N4, etc. To begin with one all is to begin with two, the all and the nothing. The first all must begin in a fundamentally unfulfilled or unsatisfied space. Any all, the all of something, the all of a molecule, the all of a point on a Cartesian plane, the all of anything at all. That all must begin in an unsatisfied, unfulfilled place. And that unsatisfied or unfulfilled place that the all begins in is not nothing, because nothing is something. The all takes part in a game of less than nothingness. And this thing that drives consciousness is less than nothingness, this eternal past that can never be sublated, this space before our lives, of all the people before us who came before, that are always there and always have been and always already are there, can never be sublated, function as a beginning, this eternally posited past that Schelling outlines, right? This eternally posited past. It indicates, just as a principle, that being itself is not one, nor is it necessarily multiple, because that would be too easy. It's a not one. It's a not one. It's not one and it's not multiple. It's a third thing. It's a not one, a non-all, a not all and a not nothing.
Hunter, I really apologize. I have to go. Is there any way I can contact you later? Because I think I'm understanding what you're saying.
There's this Yes, it's a very weird point, and I can get a lot of notes together on less than nothingness. But my point is just aiming towards less than nothingness as this functional term that dialectics play within, and that open the future into indeterminacy and to the breaking of rules and to the intervention of absolute power, potentia absoluta into the world. The less than nothingness can create more than anything we could ever imagine, I guess. And we're not going to get there if we stay still, I guess. And so if you want any hope, any chance of doing something right, we have to keep trying. And we have no hope of tabulating or economizing or calculating the goodness or the shittiness of what we do. We just have to keep digging through shit, and it sucks. It's bullshit. I'm with you. It sucks. It's fucked up.
No. It's just, I think I understand what you're saying. It's just, I have to, this is going to sound so lame, but I really have to take care of my dog.
Dude, we gotta, yeah, we're good.
I'm remembering Travis is saying, well, what good are you if you save the world, but you're not good to your kids? So I'm trying to be good to my dog, at the same time recognizing everything you're saying. So I will try to reach out to you.
Yeah, I appreciate your recognition of what's up with the world and what's up with your dog. You gotta balance the two. It's like spinning
Yes.
plates.
Yeah, if you've ever had a dog, that's true.
Yes, actually. All right. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. This is another extraordinarily interesting evening.
This was, I don't know. I feel like I don't know. I hope I didn't come across anything, but just
No. I mean,
enthusiastic.
Look, I feel the group that Nevitas created. If I thought you crossed the line, I would politely say, I think you crossed the line, and I think you would take it in the spirit and what it was meant. So I feel like we can have an incredible range of conversations.
That actually really means a lot to me, like as a friend. I really appreciate that a lot.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank
Back at you. Take care.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Thank you, Ed.
I'm exhausted.
I
get emotionally exhausted. So
I'm fucked. I'm so tired.
I just want to say that I don't think, I don't know, maybe I'm not as I haven't thought about it enough. I don't know, but I don't think I can convince you to play. I really don't. I think like for me, the best I can do is look at someone and believe that they could do something good while also seeing all the potential evil that they have, and just trying. I don't know.
I'm kind of with Sartre. He says he in that letter on humanism, when he talks about despair, he says, I know that nothing I ever do may make any difference, and yet I choose to do it anyway. And I mean, that's about as good as I can get, because if he's right, and and if I understand Hunter's, which I may not understand Hunter's interpretation of Hegel, if every positive act is necessarily going to generate something equally as negative, then there really doesn't seem to be a point. And so the only way to act is to act without a point, and to act without hope, and act in pure despair. And that's essentially what Sartre says, and that's actually very Zen as well. It's like, there is no point, there is no meaning, there is no value, and I choose to act. And if you say why, there is no answer to that question. There is no justification, there is no reason.
Yeah, and I guess, to take the dialectic approach, I guess there's an infinite number of reasons. There's an infinity to choose from. It becomes arbitrary, I guess, but there is sort of this all. But that's all. I think I
think from Hegel's perspective, there is a chance, because I don't fucking know what happens tomorrow. What, have you ever been surprised before?
Yeah, it seems like you're saying that what Hegel's saying is necessarily every positive act will generate a negativity. And so, I mean, if that's the case, then you may say, I don't know what's going to happen, but the one thing you're guaranteed is something bad's going to happen.
Yeah. And the train that's heading for us is or the light at the end of the tunnel is a train. And all we can do is try to reverse the defeat that we're handed. See the silver lining in the cloud. Yeah. And Yeah. I don't know. I might think of more, but okay. This was really good. This has really got my freaking noggin going. You know, God, I'm getting notifications at the wazoo. Okay, bye. Should we leave? Can we leave? We're done. Bye. Okay. Yes, that's it. Bye. Bye. Okay, I'm leaving the meeting.